afternoon, Carl.
Greetings, Michael. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you? I feel like you've been all over for the past few years. Like you went from the US, you were in New Zealand for a year or two, you were in the UK for like a year. You're back in the US now. Welcome back. But like I have actually been wondering, what are you doing here in the US now? Like what are you doing at this point to keep yourself busy?
Yeah, well, thank you for asking. But first, let's for the record, we were in New Zealand 3.5 years, which is crazy, right? Like it feels
Wow,
like
time
a year ago.
flies.
Yeah, and especially there, we
Wow.
could have spent a decade there for sure. So, um, yeah, it's amazing. Like London was amazing, and one thing that was super cool to see Australia, New Zealand, and then in the UK and sort of a little bit of broader Europe, like the financial planning work that's going on there, amazing. And like you and I talk about all the time, like there are real, however we want to define that, real financial advisors all over the world. And to hear those stories, like it's almost uncanny to hear how close the struggles are and the challenges and what we're all dealing with and where we are in the whatever you want to call sort of like progression of the profession. So it's been super fun, and that's really set me up for the work I'm doing now, which is all the work at the Society of Advice. So the Society of Advice is just a place where we're collecting all those stories, gathering all those people, and mainly through I don't even know what to call it, an anti-course. I guess we'll call it an anti-course. An anti-course I built called the Fellowship. So that's what I've been focused on since we've been back.
Okay. And so where is all this? Like, are you up in a new, societyofadvice.com thing now?
Yeah. So the behavior gap work. So yes, we've tried to take all the work I'm doing specifically for advisors. Most of the behavior gap work is for advisors as well, but it's for advisors as humans, right?
Okay.
Over here, we're talking to advisors as advisors. So the societyofadvice.com,
Okay.
or if you just sort of follow the dragon around, you'll find your way there.
Follow the dragon, which we'll just understand what that means when
Later.
We see it, when we're there.
I wish I could talk more about it. I mean, we've got this thing called the Fellowship. That's the entry point to this whole world that exists, and the whole world exists. It's called the membership. I'm not allowed to talk about it, but we have this monthly call where I bring a guest on. We've had Seth Godin on and Morgan Housel on, and the goal of the call is just to make all of us better. But I digress. So follow the dragon. You can find out more about that.
All right. So for our discussion today, we've had a lot of conversations over the past couple of weeks, over the past couple of months of just kind of changes to do, things to try, ways to modify our world, try to make us better as advisors, better as clients, better in the work that we do. And so we got this great question that came in recently that I thought would be good to talk about today, which was simply put, like, where do you guys actually find the time to do all the things that you talk about? So this person kind of asked in the context of what are the daily habits that you use to try to find the time? Although I thought this was a great broader question of just how do you find the time? ... Like for all the different things that we want to do. But I think particularly in the context of being better advisors, being better in the work that we do with clients, being better as business owners, for those of us who are business owners, because it's so easy to get stuck in the doing of the work to never get really around to the me time, the professional development time, the work on the business and not in the business time, and all those different pieces that are, the classic important but not urgent, and therefore never manage to make it to the top.
Yeah, totally. That's such a great question. I would love to ask it to you. Maybe I can set it up a little bit. I often think of this as a surprise. I think of it as a visual. And I think of like having maybe a Venn diagram that's got no overlap, right? So it's essentially just two circles. And in one circle, it says like the thing you really want to do. And I would shorten that by saying the thing, right? And then, or over here, I could say, knowing, it could be the knowing doing gap, which has got some academic work done behind it. But really, let's just stick with the thing you really want to do.
Okay.
and what you're currently doing. Like the other circle would be labeled currently doing, right? So the thing and current reality. And there's a gap. So there's no overlap. There's a gap. And I think
I'm just wondering, like, are we literally seeing like the behavior map drawing process occurring in like real-time formulation here?
Well, yeah, I mean,
is this actually how they come about?
No, especially that the thing you really want to do. I was like, oh, that's way too. I immediately, as soon as I said it, I heard Ron Lieber at the New York Times say to me, "That's too many words." So it was like the thing, right? Like, yeah. So that is part of the process. It's just this whittling down, and we could call it goal and reality. You know, we could label those things, but the point is, there's a thing, and I love calling it the thing because it like sometimes when you think of it as like art, there's all this pressure and it's precious and fancy, but it's just like a thing. And often these things that we really want to do are unspeakable, meaning like you don't even know what it is. You just have I like to think of it as like there's just movement, right? Or sometimes I compare it to, for those of you who aren't watching, I'm rubbing my fingers. Sometimes I compare it to a sliver just underneath the skin, right? It's sort of, you're not quite sure it's there yet, but it's been kind of annoying you, like kind of speaking to you. So there's this thing, right? That's what I'm talking about, the thing. And we all have them. I want to leave and start my own firm. I want to write a novel. I want to raise my hand at the next, parent meeting for the soccer team. I'm just the secretary, but I've got all these ideas. Like, they don't have to be heroic. You don't have to sell your house. You don't have to move to New Zealand, but there's often a thing that we want to do. And we're trained to jam it down, right? Like, go back to being responsible. Ever since we were in second grade, probably, like, go back to being responsible. But I'm just saying, okay, let's, and I'm setting this up because I want to ask you, like, how you do a lot of things. Yeah. And I'm curious how you do them. So you got a thing you really want to do, and then you got this really frustrating experience of knowing there's a gap. And the first thing I would say is like giant group empathetic hug. Like, just know you're not alone in being frustrated by that gap. Like, this is how I want to behave. This is how I'm currently behaving. So Michael and I spend a lot of time talking, like you and I spend a lot of time talking about all these things we could or should be doing. I want to do more content marketing. I want to write a book. I want to start a podcast, like I want to niche my business, like all those things. And all of us have this gap. So I know you've got a lot of things that you're doing, and I bet there are some things you really want to do. How do you find the time to close that gap, to get like overlap on the Venn diagram? What are some tips or tricks you use to find the time?
So, I've told a version of this, I think once or twice in the past, maybe on Financial Advisor Success podcast. I hit a version
that other podcast.
That other podcast. Like I hit a version of the wall on this, like the wall, like when you're chugging along in the business and you hit like the wall and it burns you out and lays you out flat. I hit a version of that wall about 4 or 5 years ago. Or just so much stuff going on, so many things I want to do, saying yes to lots of things that are coming on, and absolutely drowning myself to the point that I couldn't get any of the stuff done that I really wanted to get done. I was always in reactive mode to everything else that was happening. And, I heard this analogy about time that I'm told comes originally from Stephen Covey of sand, rocks, and pebbles. Yeah. So some people may have heard this. Like, imagine for a moment, you're holding like a glass mason jar, like a big old jar in front of you. The jar is the representation of your time, the time in your day or the time in your week. It is fixed. It is not changing in its size or structure at all. You cannot manipulate it in any way. Like, it's a big old glass mason jar. If you try to change it, it's just going to break. So you have to operate within this constraint, right? And whether it's you or me or my kids or, a world leader, we all have the same 24 hours in a day, 168 hours in a week container to deal with. So within that, there's a bunch of different stuff that we do. There's, a few big things that we try to work on. These are like big old rocks. There's lots of little things that we've got to get done from day to day and week to week. Like, those are the pebbles. And then there's just the never ending flow of stuff that eventually will fill in every single nook and cranny. the phone calls, the email, the Slack messages or Salesforce chat or whatever it is you use, like the constant stream of communication and sand. And so the challenge that most people have is there's a lot of sand that chews up the day. Just right, the emails and the notifications, enough's ever stop. It's hard not to continue to react to them. Then eventually there's like a couple of things on your to-do list that you had to hit. Those are the pebbles, like got to do that meeting because that is scheduled for me, and like I got to get that one really important report prepped for tomorrow's meeting. Like we hit a few of the pebbles, and then by the time you get to the actually like big heavy important stuff, it's like I'm freaking tired. This has been a long day. I've only got like 40 minutes left. I'm not picking this up now. And wash, rinse, repeat. That happens day after day, week after week, and the big stuff never gets moved and it never gets done. And so kind of the analogy to this, like if you think of the mason jar in front of you, it's like fill the mason jar about 2/3 with sand, then pour a bunch of pebbles on top until the thing's almost full, and then take a big fist-sized rock and try to get it into the jar. And there is just literally no space. Like a tiny piece of the rock is going to rest on the lip of the jar, and basically the whole rock is just going to be sitting above the jar, never getting in the jar, because there ain't no darn room left after the sand and the pebble filled everything in. So the principle of this from a time management perspective is you place the big rock first, right? So now like pour out the mason jar so it's empty, take the rock, put the rock in the big old rock in the completely empty mason jar. So like it fits, it's fine. There's like a whole bunch of space around it because it's an irregularly shaped rock in a nice, perfectly cylindrical mason jar. So now you take some of the pebbles, important things you have to do, put them in as well. So they'll kind of fall around, they'll fall to the side, they'll fall in the gaps between the rock to the like the lower corners. Then take the sand and pour it in on top.
Right.
You are still going to fill the jar. That sand is going to fill every possible nook and cranny in the jar. It gets in every little tiny crevice. You will fill the jar to the brim. But because you put the big rock in first, the big rock's going to fit. And to the extent that there's more sand, pebbles, and rocks than could possibly fit in the jar, the only thing that's not going to fit at the end of the day is the last bit of sand you were trying to pour in on top.
Yeah.
And so what that means is, by definition, the only thing that doesn't fit is the thing that was the least important thing to fit. Because the rock is the most important thing and you got it in there, and the pebble's the second most important thing and you poured them in there already. And so to me, like the secret of time management is not some people have this magic productivity machine where they get more stuff done than other human beings. It's much less about how to be efficient with your time and much more about how to effectively prioritize your time so that when you run out of time, because we all run out of time, I have a lot of things and a lot of businesses and a lot of stuff that I do. I never have enough time. But I do make sure that the most important things get done first, get placed in that jar first, the big stuff that'll move the needle. And so then to the extent that I never quite get done with all the things I want to get done, what doesn't get done is the thing that was the most okay to not get done. I'm not happy any of it gets not done, but not everything fits. So the most important things get done, and the things that don't are the things that were most okay to not get done.
Yeah, I love that story, and I can remember the first time I heard that, and it's always been impactful to me. And I believe the same thing you do, that it was Covey. Let me ask you a question about it. Normally, the big rock, as we've already defined, most often the big rock is important, incredibly important. In fact, it's the thing you would identify probably like, this is so important to me. You would say that. And then we look at your calendar. Remember, the calendar and the checkbook never lie, right? Like, I don't really care what you tell me is important to you. I'll tell you what's important to you by looking at your calendar. You look at the calendar and you never make time for it. So it's important and often not urgent. Mm-hmm. By definition, those things are sometimes they might not be hard in the sense of like physical labor. They often take deep work, like focus, sort of concentration. And so when you go like, okay, I've done what Michael said, I put this block of time in the calendar and it says big rock, right? Like the things identified, I know exactly what I'm going to go do. It's not overly complex. work. It's I know what to do. So I'm trying to get rid of all these other stories we tell ourselves. So I know what to do, and I've got the time in my calendar to do it. And then I go to do it. And what happens, right? Like what often happens is, oh, it takes focus, it takes deep work. Oh, there's always something more urgent, right? There's always the emails, there's always the client calling, there's always this more urgent things. How do you deal with, I mean, like, really, how do you deal? And maybe even like, how did you struggle with, how did you figure it out? How do you deal with keeping the urgent at bay long enough to get that big rock done?
So I'd answer that two ways. Number one, you kind of said part of it in there, and like for a lot of advice I see, and like certainly for me, I didn't actually do this for a long time. Literally put it on your calendar.
Sure.
You don't do rocks in the gaps in your calendar, which is how a lot of us tend to think of it. Like, I got a 3-hour block on Thursday that's not so filled, so I'll work on this thing then.
No, I just want to emphasize this point. The mason jar is your calendar.
Yeah.
Right. So if you're going to deal with the rock, the first step, which I'm not even really interested in that step, I'm interested in the next one, but the first step is you got to put the rock on the calendar first. But that to me, that's actually the biggest thing. Yeah.
So that most of us don't do, right? It's, I've got some time on Thursday afternoon. There's a blank spot on my calendar. I'm going to work on the thing then. Like, that was my mentality for years.
Yeah.
That doesn't work. Like, if you want it to do it, go to the blank spot in your calendar, put a 3-hour appointment with yourself.
Yep.
That says, whatever, the thing. In fact, in honor of Carl, you can literally just write the thing and let everybody on the team wonder like what the thing is on your calendar.
For sure.
Like,
for sure.
Schedule yourself on the calendar for the thing for 3 hours. Because when you do that, when you get to Thursday morning,
yeah,
and someone says, hey, something came up, can we meet this afternoon? When your calendar is blank because you were going to work on the thing, you end up taking the meeting. When your calendar has the thing and someone says, hey, I need to meet this afternoon, the answer is like, I'm so sorry, I'm booked. It's me time to work on the thing. It's not another client meeting, but I'm booked.
Okay, so in that very moment, has that been easy for you? Are you just like, oh, it's in my calendar, I do it?
It was much easier for me once it was on my calendar.
Okay.
It had to be on my calendar. When I went to my calendar, I'm like, look, my calendar's booked. I can't meet with you. There was already something on my calendar. Then the space got held. When there was a blank that I was mentally earmarking I was going to work on that afternoon, I could not with a straight face say to someone, I'm busy this afternoon, because I'm not. My calendar clearly said I was not. It was a blank.
Well, yeah, I use this trick for skiing because I believe chunks of unstructured time are a prerequisite for doing good work, not a reward. And so I say all the time, I mean, sometimes we even joke, I call it a board meeting because you're on boards. Get it? We've got some knee deep.
You snowboarders, you.
No, I'm not a snowboard. It's a skis. They're 2 boards.
Okay.
Or I've got some knee deep. I'm knee deep in problems right now in a board meeting. Even better. That was even better. But here's so let's say you got it scheduled. And then so some people are just disciplined enough that it's like, it's in my schedule, I'm going to do it. But then there's this thing that also happens, and I just want to see where you land on this, is you go to do it. So there's a whole bunch of other urgent stuff out there. And 3 places where you could go to find the urgent stuff. You could certainly go to your email immediately, and you'll get ping, 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 ping.
Email, Slack message, text message. That's pretty much.
If you want to add in the dopamine machines, right? Like you can add in all that stuff, social media. So where you can go. So you get there, you sit down, it's in the calendar. Just walk me through this experience. Let's say it takes a little bit of deep work. Let's say it's some Kitces original research. You're getting ready. Do you ever have the problem where you're like, oh, I wonder what's going on in email? Do you ever have that problem?
Yeah, I literally, well, so first, I turn off so as a general note, several years ago, I turned off the email notifications.
Sure. If you're not doing that, please stop listening to this right now. Turn off all that stuff. Okay. Got that.
Like, I promise you will still check all the time if you're that interested in the email, but the actual notification message is never in any way good for your productivity. So like, first it was turning off email notifications. Then frankly, the harder one for how a lot of us communicate today, I turn off the messenger applications.
For sure.
So I turn off text messages. I turn off Slack as our platform. So I turn off all the Slack notifications.
Yep.
My calendar is integrated to Slack. So when I have the meeting set on my calendar, work on the thing on Thursday for 3 hours, if anybody even tries to send me a message in Slack, they hit my do not disturb because my calendar says I'm in a meeting and it's linked to Slack. And so it automatically turns on the do not disturb that I am not replying.
Right.
So
got all that.
Like,
so
simply put,
you've done all the defense.
I turned it off.
You've done all the defense. You've done a little bit of offense by putting it in the calendar. You've set up the firewalls. But you still know where to go. So I just want to understand if you're like a cyborg. So when you go to do the thing, and you hit the hard bit, which is always like any kind of deep work or thoughtful work, it can get a little creative work. It can get a little hard. I'm going to write something. Well, a sentence or two in, maybe even at the blank page, it's like, and then there's, where you can just go to get an escape, a little dopamine hit, there's all these places to go. Do you ever deal with that? And if so, how do you deal with it?
So either one of two ways. I will set mini milestones for myself. Or like get through the spreadsheet analysis for this client scenario. Like, I got to get through the first draft of this spreadsheet. And when I get through the first draft of the spreadsheet, then I'm going to take a break. And then when I come back from the break, I'll write up the client notes or write up the report or write up the thing. Yep. So give myself permission to say, if I get to this milestone, I can have a break. And it's always something that's a little bit further down the road from where I am, right? Like, all right, if I'm going to cue myself up, I may as well give myself like a little bit of a sprint to the finish line. And then it'll feel good when I hit my waypoint finish line and I get to take a break. So you can absolutely set yourself up to take a break. And even use that as an incentive to pull you just a little bit further along. The second thing is, like, you will crave that email check or whatever it is as a dopamine hit until you give yourself another dopamine hit. Like, give yourself a substitute.
Love it.
So for me, that may be like, okay, I've earned the break. I'm gonna like take a walk outside just for a couple of minutes. I need some fresh air because I've been pent up in my office. Or I'm going to top up the coffee and take a little breather, which for me means I get to go say hello to the kids because it's pandemic time and my kitchen is an elementary school. So I get to go hang out with the kids for a couple of minutes and see how they're doing. So, my okay, I get a break, I get a little pleasure thing is not like I'm going to jump back into email and succumb to that temptation, although I might if that's the thing I want to look at. But often I've just set up like I got other things that feel good when I need to take a break. And if you just create this, like if you create a willpower battle for yourself, I'm not going to do the thing, like it doesn't work. You can't do that to yourself forever. It's literally not how our brains are wired to be able to withstand that indefinitely. You will wear yourself down. You will give in and succumb. And then you'll feel bad about the fact that you succumbed. And then you'll feel worse about your self-confidence. And then you won't even do it next time. And like, that's how you get trapped in not being able to do this stuff and follow through. It's like, give yourself some alternative positive feedback mechanism, right? For me, like it's usually simple stuff. Say hi to my wife, say hi to my kids, grab a little food, grab a drink, or get a little fresh air.
Love it.
Like it's not complex stuff. Or I'll admit, or the occasional six for me, like get a quick fix on one of the games I play on my smartphone because I am still a gamer, and so I got to get a little bit of my Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes if that's my break. But like, 5 minutes of a thing, it doesn't take long just to get a little bit of a breather and get back in there. And because I've structured a world that says everybody knows they're not getting me until 4 o'clock.
Right.
Like we're fine. And the truth at the end of the day is I think you've said this on some of our prior podcasts as well. Like, look, I'm not trying to talk down the importance of what we do as advisors and what we do in our work, but like, we are not surgeons. Like, no one's dying if we don't respond to that email for another hour or two. It's going to be okay. And frankly, well, unless you are truly down to a solo advisor and is literally just you, if anything's coming in, it's that urgent, you shouldn't be the primary line of response anyways, because you could just be in a client meeting for the next 2 hours and not be able to check your email anyways. So if there's anything that's urgent, it shouldn't be coming to you to begin with. It should be going to someone else on your team who's more likely to see the email faster than you in the first place. And if those aren't coming to you, you have even less excuse to need to dive in there and see what's going on that's urgent and risk having it suck you in and derail you down a new rabbit hole that doesn't get the original thing done. So just putting time on the calendar, giving yourself permission to say no to other meetings, other conflicts, other stuff that's going to be tempting to come in. But let's be honest, at the end of the day, it is not that urgent. And you start creating the time for yourself to do the thing, or at least to make a dent in the thing. If you can't get the whole thing done, then put 3 time blocks in your calendar in the next 2 months, and you'll chip away at the thing a little bit at a time until you get through the thing.
For sure. Yeah, I love that. Super good. Super good.
But to me, the essence of it just comes down to, like, if you want to find the time, look at your calendar and put the time on.
Yeah.
That's where there's no magic. That's where it comes from. Nobody gets extra hours. You just either prioritize it to the point that you put it on your calendar, which for most of us is kind of what makes it a priority, because then you're booked and you can't do something else in that time. And if you're feeling the pain that when you put that thing on your calendar, there's a bunch of other stuff you can't get to, right? Like, now I'm not gonna be able to get to all those emails. Like, cool. Then start thinking about how else you could handle them. Who else could respond to them? What else could you do or automate or create that you don't have to respond to them in the first place? Because there will always be more stuff that adds up than there is day to do it. But if you don't take control of it, by default, you're always in reactive mode to the emails in the sand and you never get to the rocks. If you prioritize the rocks and you find out you're missing sand that's important, find a way to restructure it. Otherwise, you're just going to miss the stuff that, let's be honest, at the end of the day, it wasn't that important.
Totally. That's amazing. Super helpful. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Carl.
Yeah.